The morning sun filtered through the blinds of Luke Carter's Boston office, casting geometric shadows across the mahogany desk where surveillance equipment lay neatly arranged. At 34, Luke moved with the quiet precision of a man who had learned that details could mean the difference between life and death. His security consulting firm occupied a modest space in Back Bay, but his client list read like a who's who of Boston's legal and financial elite. The perimeter sensors are calibrated to ignore anything under 20 pounds, Luke explained to Margaret Chen, the senior partner at Hartwell Associates. False alarms from office cats are now a thing of the past. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I have saved something extra special for you. Margaret nodded approvingly as she examined the sleek black devices. Your reputation precedes you, Mr. Carter. Word is, you can make Fort Knox look like a corner store. Luke's smile was measured, professional. He'd learned to deflect compliments about his skills. Few people needed to know about the years he had spent with Delta Force, where those same instincts had kept him alive in places that didn't appear on any map. The installation wrapped up by 3 o'clock, and Luke drove home through Boston's winding streets to the brownstone he shared with Emily. The apartment smelled of lavender candles and the faint trace of Emily's perfume, expensive, sophisticated, like everything else about his wife. "How was your day?" Emily asked, not looking up from the stack of papers spread across their dining table. Her auburn hair caught the late afternoon light as she worked, pen moving in swift, decisive strokes. "Productive," I replied, loosening my tie. "Yours?" "The Whitmore account is being demanding again." She finally glanced up, her green eyes holding that familiar, calculating gleam. "Luke, I've been thinking about something." He paused in the doorway to the kitchen. 3 years of marriage had taught him to read the subtle shift in her tone, the one that usually preceded a request for something significant. "We should consider increasing your life insurance policy," Emily continued, her voice carefully casual. "I was talking to Jennifer at work, and she mentioned how her husband's policy barely covered their mortgage when he had that heart attack." Luke's hand stilled on the refrigerator handle. In the silence that followed, something cold and familiar stirred in his chest, the same instinct that had once warned him about roadside bombs in Afghanistan. "How much were you thinking?" he asked evenly. "Maybe 2 million? I know it sounds like a lot, but given your line of work, all those late-night security calls, the dangerous neighborhoods, it would be smart to plan ahead." The words hung in the air between them. Luke had survived 3 tours in some of the most hostile territories, had emerged unscathed from firefights that claimed better men than him. Emily knew this, knew that his current work installing surveillance systems posed about as much risk as filing taxes. "I'll think about it," he said, opening the refrigerator and pretending to study its contents. "Of course, no pressure. Just something to consider." That night, while Emily slept beside him, Luke stared at the ceiling and remembered another time when someone had suggested he wasn't likely to make it home. Colonel Brennan had pulled him aside before that last mission in Kandahar, the one that had ended with Luke dragging 2 wounded teammates through enemy fire while mortar shells rained down around them. "Some jobs change a man. Make sure you remember who you were before, Carter. The world's got enough ghosts already." Luke had survived that mission, had come home and built a quiet life, but as Emily's breathing settled into the deep rhythm of sleep, he couldn't shake the feeling that the war had followed him after all.
2 weeks later, Luke sat in his office reviewing security footage when Emily texted, "Working late again. Big presentation tomorrow. Don't wait up." The 3rd late night this month. Emily's PR firm was demanding, but she'd never been one to let work consume her evenings. Luke finished up his paperwork, grabbed dinner from his favorite Italian place on Newbury Street, and headed home. The brownstone felt different in the evening light. Shadows seemed deeper, the familiar creaks and settles of old wood more pronounced. Luke turned on the lights, poured himself a glass of bourbon, and settled into his leather chair with a book. At 11:47 p.m., he heard the sound that changed everything. The front door lock disengaged with the soft, barely audible click of someone who knew what they were doing. No fumbling with keys, no rattle of the handle. Professional work. Luke's book hit the floor as muscle memory took over. He moved through the apartment like smoke, killing lights with practiced efficiency. The bourbon glass went onto the kitchen counter without a sound. From the knife block, he selected a 7-inch chef's blade, balanced, sharp, familiar weight in his hand. The intruder stepped inside with the fluid motion of someone accustomed to uninvited entries. Tall, maybe 6'2", dressed in dark clothing that absorbed the available light. Gloves covered his hands, and even in the dim illumination from the street, Luke could see the telltale bulge of a weapon beneath his jacket. His head turned left, then right, scanning the apartment with the methodical patience of a predator. He had no idea that death was already moving behind him. Luke struck with the efficiency born of countless training exercises and too many real-world applications. His left arm snaked around the intruder's throat, while his right hand pressed the knife's edge against his neck. Not enough to cut, just enough to communicate intent. "Move, and you bleed out on my hardwood floor," Luke whispered. The intruder's hand was halfway to his weapon when Luke's arm locked around his throat. Now it hung frozen in place as the reality of his situation penetrated. "Smart man." Luke's voice carried the flat, emotionless tone he'd perfected in interrogation rooms half a world away. "We're gonna have a conversation. Hands behind your back." Zip ties from Luke's security kit secured the man's wrists. The weapon, a Glock 19 with a suppressor, clattered to the floor as Luke disarmed him. "Sit," Luke commanded, guiding him to a kitchen chair. In the overhead light, the intruder looked to be in his late 30s, with the lean build and watchful eyes of former military. A professional, not some desperate junkie looking for quick cash. "Now," Luke said, pulling up a chair to face him, the knife resting casually on his knee, "let's discuss why you're in my home." The intruder, who would later introduce himself as Mason, met Luke's stare with the stoic silence of someone accustomed to unpleasant situations. But Luke had broken harder men than this. "I'm going to make this simple," Luke said, his voice conversational. "You tell me who sent you, and you walk out of here with all your fingers. You waste my time, and we'll see how many you really need." Mason's jaw tightened, but he remained silent. Luke sighed and reached for the first aid kit he kept in the kitchen drawer. He withdrew a small bottle of iodine and set it on the table between them. "You know what this is?" Luke asked. "Most people think it's just antiseptic, but apply enough pressure to the right nerve clusters while it's on your skin, and it feels like liquid fire. Delta Force medics taught me that during survival training. Amazing what you learn when your life depends on staying quiet under interrogation." The color drained from Mason's face. "You're military." "Was military. Now I'm just a guy who really values his privacy." Luke leaned forward slightly. "Your move."
Mason stared at the bottle for a long moment, then looked back at Luke. "You're not going to torture me. I can see it in your eyes. You're not that guy anymore." "You're right," Luke said, "but I don't need to be. You see, I've had time to study your technique while you were unconscious. Professional entry, suppressed weapon, tactical clothing. This wasn't a robbery. Someone paid you to kill me." Mason's silence was confirmation enough. "The way I see it, you've got two options," Luke continued. "Tell me who hired you, and I let you walk away with a warning. Keep quiet, and I call Detective Ortiz over at Boston PD. She's got a real hard-on for solving murders, and when she finds out someone tried to kill me with an unregistered weapon—" Luke shrugged. "Well, Massachusetts doesn't mess around with attempted murder charges." "You'd turn me in?" "I'd prefer not to. Professional courtesy and all. But if you force my hand—" Mason weighed his options for another 30 seconds before his shoulders sagged in defeat. "Your wife hired me." The words hit Luke like a physical blow, even though part of him had been expecting them. Emily, the woman who'd shared his bed for 3 years, who'd listened to his stories about lost brothers in arms, who'd held him on the nights when the dreams got too vivid. Details, Luke said, his voice steady, despite the storm building inside him. She approached me through intermediaries, said she wanted it to look like a break-in gone wrong. $50,000 up front, 50 more when the job was done. Mason looked genuinely uncomfortable now. Man, if I'd known you were Spec Ops, I never would have taken the contract. How long has this been in the works? About a month. She's been tracking your routine. When you come home, when you're alone. She mentioned something about life insurance. The insurance policy conversation suddenly took on a sinister new dimension. Emily hadn't been planning for the future. She'd been planning his death. Luke stood and walked to the window, his back to Mason. The street below looked exactly as it had an hour ago, but everything had changed. The life he'd built, the peace he'd found, all of it had been an illusion. Here's what's going to happen, Luke said, turning back to Mason. You're going to leave Boston tonight. You're never going to take another contract involving me or anyone I care about, and if I ever see you again, professional courtesy goes out the window. Are we clear? Mason nodded quickly. Crystal. Luke cut the zip ties and stepped back. Mason rubbed his wrists and looked at Luke with something that might have been respect. For what it's worth, I'm sorry. Job's just a job, but I should have done better homework. Yes, Luke said quietly, you should have. After Mason left, Luke sat alone in his kitchen, staring at the knife still lying on the table. Emily would be home soon, would slip into bed beside him with lies on her lips and murder in her heart. But she didn't know that her plan had failed, didn't know that Luke was aware of her betrayal. And that gave him the advantage. The next morning, Luke watched Emily dress for work with new eyes. Every movement, every glance, every casual word carried potential meaning. When she kissed his cheek goodbye, the same lips that had ordered his death, he forced himself to respond normally. See you tonight, she said. Looking forward to it, Luke replied. 20 minutes after she left, he made a phone call he'd hoped never to make again. Reynolds Security Solutions, this is Cal. It's Luke. A pause. Jesus, Luke. It's been what, 2 years? How's civilian life treating you? I need a favor. A big one. Calvin Reynolds was Luke's spotter in Delta Force, the man who'd covered his back through 3 tours and never asked questions when Luke decided to leave the service. Now he ran a private intelligence firm out of a converted warehouse in Charlestown, providing security services to clients who valued discretion above all else.
They met an hour later in Cal's office, a Spartan space dominated by banks of monitors and communications equipment. Cal looked older, gray threading through his dark hair, lines around his eyes that hadn't been there in Afghanistan. But his handshake was still firm, his gaze still sharp. "You look like hell," Cal said, pouring 2 cups of coffee from a machine that had seen better days. "Someone tried to kill me last night." Cal set down his cup. "Come again?" Luke told him everything. Emily's request for insurance, Mason's midnight visit, the revelation of her betrayal. Cal listened without interruption, his expression growing darker with each detail. "Shit, Luke. Your wife?" "My wife." The words tasted like ash. "I need help building a case, something solid enough for the cops to act on." Cal was quiet for a moment, processing. "You could just disappear. New identity, new life. I've got contacts who could make Luke Carter vanish forever. And let her find another Mark, another husband to murder for money?" Luke shook his head. "She needs to pay for this, Cal, all the way." "Then we do this right." Cal opened a metal cabinet and began pulling out equipment. Audio surveillance, micro cameras, GPS trackers. We're going to document every move she makes, every word she says. They spent the next 3 hours planning the operation. Cal would handle the technical aspects, while Luke played the role of unsuspecting husband. They'd gather evidence until they had an airtight case, then hand it to the authorities. "One question," Cal said, as they finished up. "Why didn't you just kill Mason when you had the chance? Save yourself the trouble of proving anything." Luke considered the question. "Because that's not who I am anymore. I left that version of myself in the desert." "Sometimes the desert doesn't let you leave," Cal said quietly. That evening, Luke returned home to find Emily in the kitchen, preparing dinner as if she hadn't spent the previous month planning his murder. The normality of it, the sizzle of chicken in the pan, the smell of garlic and herbs, the soft jazz playing from her phone, made the betrayal somehow worse. "How was your day?" She asked the same question she asked every evening. "Fine," Luke replied, kissing her cheek and tasting lies. Neither of them mentioned the life insurance policy, but it hung in the air between them like a sword waiting to fall. It took 4 days to gather the evidence they needed. Cal's surveillance equipment captured everything: phone calls, text messages, meetings. Emily was careful, but not careful enough to evade the kind of systematic monitoring that Cal specialized in. On Thursday evening, Luke sat in Cal's office watching footage from a parking garage downtown. Emily's silver BMW was parked near the back, hood facing the exit. At 7:23 p.m., a figure approached from the shadows, Mason, moving with the same professional caution Luke remembered from their encounter. "Turn up the audio," Luke said. Cal adjusted the controls, and Emily's voice filled the office clear and cold as winter. "I told you not to contact me directly. The job went sideways. Your husband's not what you said he was." "What do you mean?" "Military. Special forces from the look of him. He took me down like I was some amateur street thug." A long pause. "You failed."
"I'm out. This isn't worth dying for." "We had a deal." Emily's voice carried a hard edge Luke had never heard before. "I've already put everything in motion. The insurance policy, the financial arrangements. Find someone else." "There is no one else. You were recommended as the best." "I was recommended before I knew your husband was a professional killer." Emily stepped closer to Mason, her posture aggressive. "He's not a killer anymore. He consults on security systems for law firms. He's gone soft, domestic. You just need to be smarter about it." "Lady, you don't understand. I understand that I've paid you $50,000 for nothing. I understand that every day he stays alive is another day my plans fall apart." Her voice dropped to a whisper that the sensitive microphones barely caught. "Make it look like an accident this time. A gas leak, a car crash, I don't care. But I want him dead within the week." Mason was quiet for several seconds. "Double the fee." "Fine. But this time, don't screw it up." They separated without another word, Emily driving away in her BMW while Mason disappeared back into the shadows. Luke stared at the frozen image on the monitor, his wife's face, captured in profile as she discussed his murder with the casual air of someone ordering coffee. "That's enough," Cal said quietly. "More than enough." Luke nodded, though he felt hollow inside. The woman he'd loved, the life he'd built, the future he'd imagined, all of it reduced to a financial transaction recorded in digital clarity. "What's the timeline for going to the cops?" Luke asked. "We could do it tonight, but if you want to really bury her, I'd suggest we wait for Mason to make his next move, catch them both red-handed." "No." Luke stood, his decision crystallizing. "I'm done being reactive. Time to go on the offensive." Cal raised an eyebrow. "What did you have in mind?" Luke smiled, and for the first time in 4 days, it was genuine. "I'm going to give my wife exactly what she's been asking for, a face-to-face conversation about our future." The morning air carried the scent of autumn in Boston, crisp and clean as Luke positioned himself across from Cafe Nero on Newberry Street. Through the window, he could see Emily at a corner table, her fingers drumming against her coffee cup in the same nervous rhythm he'd noticed when she was planning something significant. She checked her phone every 30 seconds, the anxiety bleeding through her carefully constructed composure. Target approaching from the east. Mason's early. Professional habit, I guess. Luke watched as Mason entered the cafe, scanning the room with practiced efficiency before spotting Emily. Even from across the street, Luke could see the tension in his shoulders. This wasn't a man comfortable with his current situation. Audio check, Cal murmured. Luke touched the small device hidden beneath his jacket collar. The directional microphone would capture everything said at Emily's table, broadcasting it live to Cal's recording equipment 3 blocks away. Mason sat down across from Emily, declining her offer of coffee with a sharp shake of his head. Luke couldn't hear their words yet, but their body language spoke volumes. Emily leaning forward, aggressive and demanding, Mason sitting back, defensive and wary. Luke gave them 5 minutes to settle into their conversation before he made his move. He crossed Newbury Street with the unhurried pace of a man grabbing his morning coffee, pushed through the glass door of the cafe, and walked directly to their table. "Mind if I join you?" he asked, pulling out the empty chair between them. Emily's face went through a fascinating progression of emotions: surprise, confusion, fear, and finally a desperate attempt at normalcy. "Luke, what are you doing here?" "Having coffee with my wife and her business associate. We've met before, haven't we?" Mason's hand drifted toward his jacket, then froze as Luke's eyes locked onto his.
I wouldn't, Luke said quietly. Luke, I don't understand what's happening here, Emily said, her voice climbing toward panic. Who is this man? This man, Luke said, pulling out his phone, is the person you hired to kill me. He pressed play on the audio file Cal had prepared, a compilation of Emily's most damning statements from the parking garage surveillance. Her voice filled the small space around their table, crystal clear and unmistakably hers. Make it look like an accident at this time, a gas leak, a car crash, I don't care. But I want him dead within the week. The color drained from Emily's face as her own words echoed back at her. Around them, other cafe patrons continued their conversations, oblivious to the drama unfolding at the corner table. That's not... I never... Emily's composure cracked like ice under pressure. That could be anyone. Voice synthesis, editing. Luke played another clip, this one with video. Emily's face on his phone screen, clear as day, discussing his murder with clinical detachment. 3 years, Luke said, his voice barely above a whisper. 3 years of marriage, and this is what it comes down to? A life insurance payout. You don't understand, Luke, Emily said, desperation creeping into her tone. I'm in debt, Luke. Serious debt. People who don't take no for an answer? So you decided to kill me instead of asking for help? Mason started to rise from his chair, but Luke's hand shot out, gripping his wrist with enough force to make the man wince. Sit, Luke commanded. We're not finished. Let him go, Emily hissed. You're making a scene. Am I? Luke looked around the cafe. Because from where I'm sitting, this is exactly the kind of scene you deserve. He released Mason's wrist and pulled out his phone again, this time dialing a number he'd memorized that morning. Detective Ortiz, this is Luke Carter. Remember that evidence package I mentioned? I'm sitting at Cafe Nero on Newbury Street with both suspects. Yes, right now. Emily's eyes went wide. Luke, please, we can work this out. We can... We're done working things out. We're done with everything. Mason made one last attempt to leave, but Luke's voice stopped him cold. Detective Ortiz has your description, your vehicle information, and a recording of you admitting to attempted murder. Running will only make things worse. The next 10 minutes passed in tense silence. Emily tried twice more to explain herself, to justify her actions, but Luke's expression remained stone cold throughout her pleas. Mason said nothing, staring at the table like a man contemplating his life choices. When Detective Ortiz arrived with 2 uniformed officers, she surveyed the scene with the sharp eyes of someone who'd seen too much in her 20 years on the force. Mr. Carter, she asked. That's me, Luke stood, extending the phone containing all their evidence. Everything you need is on here.
Detective Maria Ortiz had the weathered look of someone who'd spent 2 decades navigating Boston's underbelly. Her graying hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and her brown eyes missed nothing as she examined the evidence Luke had compiled. "This is some impressive surveillance work, almost too impressive for a civilian." "I used to work in security," Luke replied carefully. "What kind of security?" Ortiz's tone carried the weight of someone who'd learned to read between the lines. "The kind that required a security clearance." She studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "Military. Special operations, if I had to guess. The way you handled the situation at the cafe, professional, controlled. Most civilians would have either run or lost their temper." Luke said nothing, but his silence was confirmation enough. "Here's the thing," Ortiz continued, leaning back in her chair. "Your evidence is solid, rock solid. But good defense attorneys have gotten people off on less. Without Mason testifying against your wife or catching them in the act of another attempt, there's room for reasonable doubt. She hired him to kill me. It's on tape. She hired him to do something. A good lawyer could argue it was intimidation, harassment, even just elaborate role-playing." She shrugged. "I'm not saying I believe that, but juries can be unpredictable."
Luke felt the familiar cold anger building in his chest. "So what are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting we move fast and hope your wife makes a mistake. People under pressure often do." Ortiz stood and grabbed her jacket. "Let's go pick her up." They found Emily at her office, a gleaming corporate tower in the financial district. She was in the middle of a client meeting when Ortiz knocked on the conference room door, badge in hand. "Emily Carter, Boston PD. You're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder." The transformation was immediate and complete. The composed professional vanished, replaced by a woman whose carefully constructed world was collapsing in real time. "This is a mistake," Emily said as Ortiz cuffed her. "My husband is having some kind of breakdown, post-traumatic stress or something. You can't seriously believe—" "Ma'am, you have the right to remain silent," Ortiz interrupted. "I'd suggest you use it." The arrest of Mason went more smoothly. They found him at a motel in Revere, already packed and ready to run. He surrendered without resistance, the fight gone out of him completely. "Professional courtesy," he said to Luke as they led him past the unmarked car where Luke waited. "I should have listened to my instincts." "Yeah," Luke replied, "you should have." That evening, Luke sat alone in his apartment for the first time in 3 years. The silence felt different now, not peaceful, but hollow. Every familiar object carried new weight. The coffee mug Emily had bought him for their first anniversary, the throw pillow she'd insisted would tie the room together, the framed photo of their wedding day. He picked up the photo and studied Emily's smiling face. Had any of it been real? The laughter, the quiet moments, the plans they had made for the future? Or had she been calculating his death even then, measuring the distance between affection and profit? Luke set the photo face down on the table and poured himself 3 fingers of bourbon. Outside, Boston's evening traffic hummed with the white noise of a city that never truly slept. Somewhere in that city, Emily sat in a holding cell, probably still convinced she could talk her way out of this. She was wrong. The news broke 3 days later. Local woman charged in husband's murder-for-hire plot dominated the front page of the Boston Herald, complete with photos of both Emily and Mason being led away in handcuffs. Luke's military background had somehow leaked to the press, adding another layer to the story that the media couldn't resist. "Delta Force vet foils wife's murder plot," screamed the headline in the Boston Globe. Luke's phone hadn't stopped ringing since the story went public. Reporters, old Army buddies, clients expressing their shock and support. He'd stopped answering after the first dozen calls. Cal showed up that afternoon with Chinese takeout and a bottle of whiskey. "Figured you might need some company," he said, settling into Luke's kitchen like he belonged there. "Thanks." Luke accepted the container of lo mein gratefully. He hadn't realized how hungry he was until the smell of food hit him.
How you holding up? Luke considered the question. I've been better. That's putting it mildly. Cal opened the whiskey and poured 2 glasses. You know, in all the time I've known you, I've never seen you trust anyone the way you trusted her. Yeah, well, look how that turned out. They ate in comfortable silence for a while. Cal had always been good at knowing when to talk and when to just be present. It was one of the qualities that had made him such a good spotter. Patience, observation, the ability to read a situation without forcing it. You thinking about getting back in the game? Cal asked eventually. What game? Our kind of work. Private security. Government contracts. Your skills are still sharp. Sharper than most guys half your age. No. Luke shook his head. I'm done with that life.
Are you? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like that life isn't done with you. Before Luke could respond, his phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. He glanced at it, expecting another reporter, and felt his blood turn to ice. You think she was working alone? Luke stared at the message, reading it 3 times before the words fully registered. Cal noticed his expression and leaned over to read the screen. Shit, Cal muttered. Burner phone? Luke was already pulling up the number, running it through a reverse lookup. Dead end. Prepaid. Probably ditched already. Could be a crank. Story like this brings out all kinds of weirdos. But Luke was already moving, his survival instincts fully engaged. He walked to the window and scanned the street below, looking for anything out of place. A car that had been there too long, a pedestrian who seemed too interested in his building, any detail that didn't belong. Luke. Someone else was pulling the strings, Luke said, still watching the street. Emily didn't have the connections to find Mason on her own. She barely knew how to change a tire, let alone hire a professional killer. Cal joined in at the window. You're thinking handler? Someone with access to that kind of network? Has to be. And if they hired Mason once, they might try again. Cal was quiet for a moment. We need to dig deeper. Emily's financial records, phone logs, everything we didn't look at the first time. Luke's phone buzzed again, another text from the same unknown number. She was just the messenger. Tomorrow, 10 p.m., Charlestown Navy Yard. Come alone. Well, Cal said, reading over Luke's shoulder, that's not ominous at all. Luke forwarded the message to Detective Ortiz, then began checking his gear. The 9mm Sig Sauer he'd carried in Afghanistan emerged from its hiding place in the bedroom safe, along with 2 spare magazines and a tactical knife. You're not seriously considering going, Cal said. I'm considering it very seriously. It's obviously a trap. Of course it's a trap. Luke checked the Sig's action, muscle memory guiding his hands through the familiar routine. But it's also information. Someone wants me to know something, or they wouldn't have reached out. They want you dead, Luke, just like Emily did. Maybe. Or maybe they want to clean up loose ends before this gets out of hand. Luke holstered the weapon and looked at Cal. I'm done being reactive. Time to take the fight to them. Cal sighed and reached for his own phone. Well, if you're going to be stupid about this, at least let me be stupid with you. I'll set up Overwatch, maybe bring some backup. They said, come alone. They said a lot of things. Doesn't mean we have to listen. The Charlestown Navy Yard at 10 o'clock on a Tuesday night felt like a graveyard of American naval history. Decommissioned ships sat at anchor like sleeping giants, their hulls dark against the Boston Harbor's black water. Luke arrived early, as he always did, taking position on a pier that gave him clear sightlines in all directions. Cal's voice whispered through his earpiece. Overwatch in position. I've got eyes on the main approach and the water. 2 guys with me, both former Rangers. If this goes sideways, we'll rain hell on whoever's responsible. Copy, Luke murmured, checking his watch. 9:55 p.m.
At exactly 10 p.m., a figure emerged from the shadows near the USS Constitution. Average height, dark coat, walking with the measured pace of someone accustomed to dangerous meetings. Luke let him approach to within 20 feet before speaking. "That's close enough." The figure stopped, hands visible. "Mr. Carter, thank you for coming." The voice was educated, refined, East Coast accent, probably Harvard or Yale, not what Luke had been expecting. "You wanted to talk. Talk." "My name is David Garrison. I represent certain interests that were invested in your wife's success." "Invested how?" Garrison stepped closer, just inside the circle of light from a nearby lamppost. He was younger than his voice suggested, maybe 40, with the soft look of someone who'd never missed a meal or faced real danger. "Emily came to us 6 months ago. She'd accumulated significant gambling debts with some very unforgiving people. We offered to clear those debts in exchange for a simple service. My murder. Your elimination, yes. You possessed information that certain parties found inconvenient." Luke felt the familiar cold certainty settling over him. "What information?" "Operation Desert Shade, Kandahar Province, 2019. You were there when Captain Morrison was killed." The name hit Luke like a physical blow. James Morrison had been his commanding officer, killed by an IED during what should have been a routine patrol. But Luke had always suspected there was more to Morrison's death than bad luck and bad timing. Morrison discovered that certain defense contractors were selling weapons to both sides of the conflict. Profits were substantial. Morrison was preparing to go public. "So you had him killed." "We had him transferred to a more dangerous assignment. What happened after that was simply the fortunes of war." Luke's hand drifted toward his weapon. "And you think I know something about this?" "We think Morrison shared his suspicions with his most trusted subordinate before he died. We think that subordinate has been sitting on explosive information for 6 years, waiting for the right moment to use it." "You think wrong." Garrison smiled. "Perhaps. But my employers prefer certainty. Emily's plan would have provided that certainty, along with plausible deniability. A grieving widow discovering her dead husband's secret files, sharing them with the authorities out of patriotic duty." "You bastards! You turned my wife against me to cover up war profiteering." "We offered her a solution to her problems. She chose to accept our terms." Luke's phone buzzed. Cal's voice followed immediately. "Luke, we've got movement. At least 3 shooters taking position around the pier. This was a setup." Garrison's smile widened. "I'm afraid this conversation is about to become significantly more complicated, Mr. Carter." The first shot shattered the lamppost above them, plunging the pier into darkness. Luke dove left as muzzle flashes erupted from 3 directions. His military training kicked in instantly, calculating angles and distances while his body moved on pure instinct. Garrison had vanished into the shadows, but Luke had bigger problems, professional shooters with overlapping fields of fire. "Cal, I need suppressing fire on the north position." Luke spoke into his mic while crawling behind a concrete barrier. "Copy. Lighting him up now." The night exploded with gunfire as Cal and his team engaged the shooters. Luke used the distraction to move toward the water, where a maintenance ladder led down to a floating dock. If he could reach the boats. A bullet whined off the concrete inches from his head. Someone had flanked him, coming around the far side of the pier.
Luke rolled right, brought up his Sig Sauer, and put 2 rounds center mass into a figure moving between the shadows. The man dropped, but Luke was already moving again. Stay in one place too long, and superior numbers would overwhelm him. "Luke, I need suppressing fire on the north position." "Copy. Lighting him up now." The night exploded with gunfire as Cal and his team engaged the shooters. Luke used the distraction to move toward the water, where a maintenance ladder led down to a floating dock. If he could reach the boats...
He reached the edge of the pier just as the speedboat's engines roared to life. Without hesitation, Luke dove into the dark water, the shock of October cold stealing his breath. He surfaced 20 yards from the boat, treading water and fighting the weight of his soaked clothing. The boat was pulling away, but not fast enough. Luke drew his waterproof sidearm, a habit from his Delta days, and fired 3 controlled shots at the outboard motors. Sparks flew, and one engine coughed and died. The boat slowed, but didn't stop. Garrison leaned over the side, something metallic glinting in his hand. The sniper shot came from nowhere, a sound like thunder rolling across the water. Garrison's head snapped back, and he toppled into the harbor with a splash that was almost lost in the noise of the dying engine. "Sniper!" Cal's voice crackled through Luke's earpiece. "Unknown position probably across the channel. Garrison's down." Luke swam hard for the nearest dock as more shots rang out behind him. When he finally hauled himself out of the water, gasping and shivering, the pier had gone quiet. Cal and his team emerged from cover, weapons trained on the scattered bodies of the shooters. "2 dead, 1 wounded," Cal reported, "but we've got a problem." He led Luke to where Garrison's body had washed up against a piling. The man's coat had fallen open, revealing a leather portfolio secured inside a waterproof pouch. Luke opened it with numb fingers. Inside were documents that made his blood run cold. Financial records showing payments to Emily, photos of Luke taken from a distance, and, most damning of all, a list of names, military personnel who had served under Captain Morrison. 7 names total. 6 had been crossed out in red ink. Luke's name was the only one left unmarked. "Jesus," Cal breathed, reading over Luke's shoulder. "They've been hunting Morrison's entire unit." 6 men dead, Luke said quietly. 6 good soldiers, and I never even knew. At the bottom of the portfolio was a single business card. Meridian Solutions, Private Military Consulting. And underneath, in Garrison's neat handwriting, Phase 1 complete, initiate Phase 2 upon confirmation. Luke looked up at Cal, water still dripping from his hair. Garrison was a small time, a middleman. Whoever hired that sniper, whoever's really behind this, they're cleaning house. Including Garrison? Including Garrison. Luke pocketed the business card and stood, which means they know I'm still alive, and they know I have questions. In the distance, police sirens wailed as Boston PD responded to reports of gunfire at the Navy Yard. Luke and Cal gathered their gear quickly, disappearing into the maze of old buildings and narrow streets that surrounded the harbor. As they reached Cal's car, Luke's phone buzzed one final time. Another unknown number, another message that chilled him to the bone. Morrison's ghost won't stay buried forever. Neither will you. Luke stared at the screen, then looked up at Cal. "We're not done. This is just the beginning." Cal started the engine, his face grim. "Then we'd better get ready for war." As they drove away from the Navy Yard, Luke fingered the business card in his pocket and thought about 6 dead soldiers who died for asking too many questions. Tomorrow, he'd start asking those same questions, and this time, he wouldn't stop until he had answers. Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch, and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.